Chapter 1. The Chase. Nick whispers, "Keep your head down. And stay quiet." The fog wraps around us like wet linen, and the rain has turned cold, needle-thin, and endless. We glide across the water in silence, each creak of the boat sounding louder than the last. I can't see more than a few feet ahead, but I feel something behind us. Like eyes. Like breath. I've never been this scared. There's no way to fix this. No way to go back. I don't even know where back is anymore. My heart is pounding in my throat, and the oar I'm holding might as well be a sword made of glass. How did I get here? Am I going to die? Grab an oar. Nick says louder now, urgency cutting through the fog. Go now. They see us. I don't ask who. I already know. The mist parts for just a breath, and there, slicing toward us through the storm, is the ship. Larger. Sleeker. Its sail is slack in the rain, but it doesn't need wind. It has oars. Too many. They dip and rise in rhythm, cutting the dark sea like knives. Celtic raiders. Their ship isn't crashing through the water, it's gliding, like a wolf on ice. And it's gaining. Nick rows. I row. Our muscles scream, but the water offers no grace. We were never going to outrun them. A shout from the other ship cuts the silence like thunder. Seconds later, a hook catches the edge of our boat, snapping wood and dragging us sideways. Nick tries to shout something, maybe a prayer, maybe a warning, but they're already on us. The last thing I see before we're taken is the look in his eyes. Not fear. Resignation. He's been here before. But I haven't. Not yet. Chapter 2. Before the fog, the harbor stank of fish, salt, and smoke. It was loud, crowded, and always moving. Carts rolling over cobblestones. Sailors shouting in broken Latin. Gulls fighting for scraps above the crates. But I liked it. It was the only place I didn't feel trapped. I wasn't supposed to be there that morning. My father had told me to stay behind and tend to accounts. But the sea called louder than coin. I had no idea that one conversation, one stranger, was about to change everything. He stood near the edge of the dock, inspecting a tangled net with more patience than a fisherman should have. A worn satchel hung across his chest. Sandals, not boots. Eyes that scanned the world like he was writing it all down in his mind. He didn't belong here. Not in Londinium. Not even in Britain. I didn't mean to speak to him, but something about the way he held a piece of driftwood, like it meant something, drew me in. "You lost?" I asked. He looked up, then smiled, half curious, half amused. "No, but maybe you are." I scoffed, trying to hide the sudden heat in my face. "What gave you that idea?" "The way you keep looking at the sea, like it's asking you a question." I didn't have an answer for that. He introduced himself as Nicholas, from Myra. Myra, he explained, was in Lycia. Lycia, he explained, was in Asia Minor. When I gave him a blank stare, he laughed and said, "It's south of Greece." That, at least, I had heard of. We talked for a while. About storms. About strange foods. About ships and scrolls, and the rumors of a new faith spreading across the empire. Christianity, he called it. A story about a carpenter, a cross, and a rising again. I'd heard of it. Barely. But he knew it. Not like a priest reciting. Like someone who had bled with it. By the time we realized the tide had come in, we were both sitting on overturned barrels, knees damp, bread forgotten in our hands. I never expected to see him again. But the sea, it seems, had other plans. We walked the old merchant path, where the stone was still warm from morning sun, and the noise of the market faded into wind and gulls. Nicholas slowed as we passed a crooked wooden sign shaped like a drum. "Is that a toy shop?" he asked. I raised a brow. "What, you need a wooden horse?" He smiled like he knew something I didn't. "No, but I like to see what people make for their children. It says a lot." We ducked into the shop. It was cluttered, shelves packed with carved animals, soldiers, painted tops, and stitched dolls missing buttons. The air smelled like cedar and glue. An old man behind the counter was trying to fix a cracked whistle, tongue between his teeth. Nicholas picked up a toy boat. The paint was chipped, but it had detail, a rope etched on the deck, tiny sails sewn from scraps. "This one's seen a few adventures," he said, running his finger along the edge like it mattered. "You like toys?" I asked. He shrugged. I like things made with care, especially when they're meant to be given. I didn't know it then, but he'd remember that boat for years. We stopped at 2 more shops before heading back to the harbor. He didn't buy anything. He just looked, asked questions, watched how the shopkeepers spoke to the children. He never said it outright, but I started to understand something about Nicholas. He was always thinking about others, even when it looked like he was just wandering. And maybe that's what made him different. At the last shop, Nicholas lingered by a small table stacked with parchment scraps. The owner waved them off as useless trimmings, good only for kindling. Nicholas asked, "May I take one?" He folded it with care, slowly, like he'd done it 100 times before. In a few moments, it became a boat. Then he took another piece and folded it into something with wings. I watched, leaning over. "What is that?" "A bird," he said, "but not one from stories. One that glides on wind you can't see." He placed it gently on the shopkeeper's counter, smiled at a child who'd been peeking from behind a barrel, and whispered, "Catch it if you can." Then he blew across the wings, and the bird lifted, hovered, and floated toward the child's open hands. The child's eyes lit up. He laughed. And just like that, Nicholas became unforgettable. We stepped outside, and I said, "Where did you learn that?" "From a traveler in Antioch," he replied. He called it origami, said it was an art that makes paper breathe. I didn't know what to say. I think that was the moment I stopped thinking of Nicholas as a boy, and started wondering what kind of man he would become. Outside the shop, we lingered under the awning, the folded bird still gliding through my thoughts. "You always carry paper with you?" I asked. "Not always. But when I do, I usually end up folding it into something." "You're like a walking toy shop." He gave a small shrug. "Maybe someday. When I'm older and quieter, I'll just go from village to village making boats and birds." I smirked. "You'd need a bigger bag." We stood there a moment, watching a group of children run by in the rain. Then he said it again, just like he had before. "We always meet when we're not supposed to." I glanced sideways. "So maybe we should plan the next one." He smiled. "You have something in mind?" "Actually, yeah. Tomorrow I've got some time. There's a small island just off the coast, just far enough to feel like an escape, but not far enough to get us in trouble. There's a sailboat I know how to borrow." He raised an eyebrow. "Borrow," lightly, respectfully, "and only for a few hours." Nicholas laughed, then nodded. "Then tomorrow we meet on purpose. To do something we shouldn't." "Exactly." He looked out toward the sea, then back at me. "I'm looking forward to it." And for the first time since meeting him, I felt something unexpected. Excitement. Chapter 3. The borrowed boat. I woke up before the sun. Not because I'm a morning person, but because today was different. Today I wasn't expected to account for crates, or write numbers in the ledger, or pretend to care about my father's clients. Today I had a plan. A stolen moment. An escape. I dressed quickly, quietly, careful not to wake anyone. My room was just a corner of the upstairs loft, sloped roof above, creaky floor below. I paused at the stairs, listening. My mother was already up. I could hear her humming downstairs, just softly, like she always did when she had a few minutes to herself before the house truly woke. I loved her in a way that ached. She deserved a quieter life, a kinder one. She deserved a husband who didn't see her as a vessel for sons and property. My father. He was like the fog, always there, cold, blocking out light. Not cruel in the way that leaves bruises, but in the way that slowly grinds a person down. He wasn't part of us. Not really. He was just the roof over our heads, and the shadow we moved around. I didn't want to be like him. I didn't want to take over his business, or his opinions, or his silence. That's why I liked the sea. That's why I liked Nicholas. He listened. He asked questions no one asked. He carried something with him, something light, even when the world was heavy. I tiptoed past my mother's kitchen, just close enough to smell warm bread and salt. She didn't see me. I didn't want her to. If she asked where I was going, I wouldn't lie. But I didn't want to make her complicit. Not today. I stepped outside, the morning chill wrapping around me like a reminder. This was real. We were really going. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled without having to force it. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few merchants preparing carts and stray dogs chasing each other down the alley. The sky was still gray, but not in a threatening way, just the kind of gray that makes the sea feel close. I walked fast, then slowed down, then fast again. I wasn't used to this kind of nervous. Not the bad kind, like when I had to answer to my father. The good kind. Like something important was about to happen, even if I couldn't name it. The path to the harbor curved along a narrow ridge where you could see the whole bay. That's where I spotted him, Nicholas, already at the boat. He was crouched near the dock, tucking a wrapped bundle beneath the bench. He looked up and gave me a short wave, then returned to tying a rope with deliberate care. "You're early," I said as I came up behind him. "You're late," he replied without looking up, but only by a few heartbeats. I laughed. I didn't realize we were counting those now. We should. They're the only things we can't buy back. He stood, brushing the salt from his palms. He wore the same worn cloak as yesterday, but it looked different in the morning light, like he belonged to the sea more than the street. I looked down at the small sailboat. It had seen better days, but it was just the right size for 2 foolish boys and 1 borrowed adventure. "You ready?" I asked. He smiled. "I've been ready since the first toy shop," just as the light began to change, still gray, but touched now with something golden near the edge of the clouds. The water was calm, barely moving, like it was holding its breath for us. Nicholas took the stern. I sat at the bow. We didn't talk for a while, just let the silence settle. The kind of silence that feels like permission. The sail caught a small breeze, and we started to drift forward, gliding past fishing boats and anchored ships too large for adventure. Soon the docks were behind us, and the island ahead began to rise, just a dark, green smudge on the waterline. "What's it called?" Nicholas asked, nodding toward it. "Never had a name, far as I know," I said. "My uncle used to say it was cursed, which usually just means no one's rich enough to care about it." "Perfect," he said with a grin. "Nothing important ever starts somewhere safe." The closer we got, the more the island took shape. Craggy rocks on the near side, a stretch of trees clinging to the middle, and a jagged cliff that dropped straight into the sea. It was strange, wild and quiet all at once. I pointed toward the narrow inlet between 2 rocks. "We'll go around that bend. There's a little bay, mostly hidden. Flat stones. Good place to land." Nicholas nodded, adjusting the sail. But then he paused, eyes lifting to the sky. "What?" I asked. He squinted. "The light just changed." I looked too. The breeze had died. The sea flattened. And the clouds, once soft and slow, were now curling at the edges. Darker. Lower. "We've got time," I said, though even I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. He didn't answer. Instead, he gently lowered the sail. And I felt it before I heard it. The first low, distant beat of oars against water. Nicholas turned sharply, his voice tight. "Don't look behind us. Just grab the rope and help us turn. Now." The wind came back, not playful this time. Sharp. Wet. Cold. The first raindrop hit my neck like a slap. I turned anyway. Through the mist, slicing toward us with terrifying grace, was a long, black boat. And it was coming fast. The wind didn't come back like we hoped. It came too hard. From the wrong direction. The sail flapped violently, then went limp. Rain slammed down in sheets, turning the deck slick and the air almost white. We tried to adjust the lines, but the ropes tangled, and the boat spun sideways. Nicholas cursed under his breath, not loud, but sharp. His hands moved quickly, trying to free the sail, but it was no use. The rain had soaked the canvas. It hung like a dead thing. Then we heard it again. That rhythm. Oars. Nicholas froze for just a second, then closed his eyes. And he whispered something quick and low, in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't Greek. It wasn't Latin. It was older, gentler. A language shaped by water and wind. Then he opened his eyes. "We need to go. Now. The sail, forget the sail. Oars. Fast as you can." I grabbed one and pushed it into the water, heart pounding. Nicholas took the other side. He didn't need to explain what he saw. Because when I turned, just briefly, through the blur of rain and fog, I saw them. A longboat, black hull, painted shields, 8 oars in perfect rhythm. Celtic raiders. They weren't struggling in the storm. They were born for it. The sail dies first. No warning. Just gone. A wet slap. A twist of ropes. Then silence. And then not silence. The rain starts. Not gentle. Like nails. Like 1,000 hands trying to drag us under. Nicholas stops moving. Just for a breath. Eyes closed. Lips moving. A language I've never heard. Something pulled from deep, deep memory. Then, they're coming, he says. And everything in me turns to ice. I want to ask who. I already know. Row, he says. His voice is calm. But his hands? They're shaking. I grip the oar. Push. Dig. Pull. The boat groans. We're not moving fast enough. Another sound now. The worst one. Wooden oars. In rhythm. 8 of them. Maybe more. I look back. I shouldn't. A shadow. A ship. Long, dark, hungry. Painted shields. Red faces. Hair like fire and mud. The Celts don't shout. They don't need to. They're already winning. But then, the rain thickens. Not just heavy. Blinding. A curtain dropping between us and everything behind. The rhythm of oars fades. Keep going, Nicholas says. Hard to the left. Now. We pivot, scraping across the edge of a reef. Waves slap against the hull, and the boat jerks, spins, rights itself. I look back, nothing. No longboat. No painted shields. Only mist and water and the weight of silence. Do you think we lost them? I ask, breathless. Nicholas doesn't answer. He's listening, his eyes darting like he's reading the wind itself. Then he says, lie flat. Stay quiet. What? Now. There's something in his voice, sharp, no time for questions. I drop to the boards. The wood is soaked and freezing beneath me. I can hear every drip, every creak, every pulse in my ears. Then I hear it. The oars. Not fading. Just silent for a moment. Then closer. They're gliding. Right past us. Maybe feet away. Maybe less. I hold my breath. So still it hurts. Nicholas leans over and whispers, keep your head down. And stay quiet. I can't see them anymore. But I know they're there. Close. Close enough to smell the salt off their skin. Close enough to hear the splash of each or slicing through the sea. I press my face against the boards. My breath is shallow. My fingers are cramping from a cold. And in that stillness, hope unravels. There's no getting out of this. No clever turn. No quick escape. No storm strong enough to save us now. This is it. How did I get here? Just yesterday, we were walking past toy shops, laughing about birds made of paper. Now I'm about to be taken, maybe killed, by men I don't even understand. I think of my mother. She'll never know what happened to me. My father, he might not even notice I'm gone. And Nicholas, he's still upright. Still listening. Still. Calm? Why isn't he panicking? He turns toward me, just a little, and says the words that seal it, grab an oar. My stomach drops. They see us. The water erupts. Hooks slam into the sides of the boat. A shout. 2. Then hands grabbing, yanking, tearing. We fight, but it doesn't matter. We're lifted, shoved, slammed down into their vessel. I catch one last glimpse of the island, small, quiet, fading into the mist. And then everything goes dark. Chapter 4. Taken when I wake. The world is still moving. It takes a moment to realize it's the boat, not me. My head's pressed against rough wood, slick with sea salt and blood that might be mine. My wrists burn. Bound. I try to lift my head, but something heavy presses down across my shoulders, another body. Breathing. Groaning. Nicholas. He's alive. I whisper his name. His eyes crack open. He doesn't speak. Just meets my gaze. They haven't gagged us. Not yet. Around us, others are slumped together. Bound the same way. Some are boys. Some are older. One girl stares blankly at the deck, her lips moving like she's praying. but not to any god I know. The raiders don't speak to us. Only to each other in a clipped, sharp rhythm I don't understand. We are cargo now. Exile isn't a place, it's a feeling. And I've never felt it more than I do here, bruised and silent on a boat that isn't ours, heading toward a world we've never seen. The island is gone. The coast is gone. Everything familiar has vanished behind us. And the only thing I have left is Nicholas, watching, always watching, like he's memorizing every face, every gesture. Like he knows we'll need to remember. It's hard to tell how long we've been at sea. The clouds never lift. The food is stale. The water is worse. But it isn't the cold or hunger that unsettles me most. It's the change. The raiders have stopped shouting. They're quieter now, focused, repeating short commands, checking ropes, readying gear. Their faces are tense, not wild, not drunk with victory, just alert. Something's coming. Nicholas is lying next to me, still bound, still silent. But his eyes are scanning. He leans in, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. We're close. I nod. You understand them? He doesn't answer right away. Then, not the words. Not exactly. But I understand them. I give him a confused look. There's a rhythm to people, he says. Their tone, their pace, how they move when they speak. It's like he stops, searching for the right phrase, like a language beneath the language. I stare at him. That's poetic. It's practical, he replies. They're preparing to dock. They'll offload supplies. And us. The word us lands like a stone in my stomach. I swallow hard. What do you think they'll do? Nicholas doesn't answer right away. His eyes flick toward the horizon. I think we're not considered people anymore, he says quietly. We're inventory, Chapter 5. The holding penned the boat slid into a narrow cove just before dusk. No fanfare. No war cries. Just the crunch of wood on gravel, and the low grunts of men unloading crates like we were nothing but another haul of salted meat and woven cloth. They dragged us off in groups, for at a time, still bound, and marched us inland along a muddy path through thick, unfamiliar trees. My legs barely worked, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Behind me, Nicholas limped but never stumbled. We were herded into a large wooden cage, more pen than prison, set on the edge of a wide clearing. Others were already there. Gaunt men, silent women, children too young to understand what this place meant. The cage was crude but strong. Its roof was slatted wood. No fire, no comfort, just straw, cold ground, and eyes that didn't meet ours. They fed us. Not kindly, but regularly. Bread, dried roots, water in wooden bowls. It went on like that for 5 days. We weren't beaten. We weren't questioned. We were just stored. And that's when Nicholas pulled it out, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden against his skin. The book, the Greek Bible. How? I started stunned. They searched for blades, not words, he said. Each night, as the others slept or stared into the dark, he opened the pages. His fingers moved like they were touching something alive. And slowly, he began to read aloud. Not loudly, just to me, sometimes just to himself. At first, I listened because it passed the time. Then I listened because I needed it. The words weren't magical, but they were steady, clear, like a current beneath the noise of fear. Others began to listen, too, quietly, not understanding the language, maybe, but understanding the tone, the calm, the focus. Even the guards noticed. One of them knelt outside the cage on the third night, pointing. You, priest? He asked in broken Latin. Nicholas met his gaze. Scribe, he said. The man grunted and walked off. But the next day he brought paper, a stump of charcoal. Nicholas was being watched now, not as prey, as potential. Chapter 6. The night before the festival, the first night in the cage, was the hardest. Not because of the cold, though the air bit through the slats like knives. Not because of the food, though it tasted like it had already been eaten once. Not even because of the bruises on my wrists or the smell of fear around me. It was the silence. It gave me time to think. And thinking was the worst part. Before this, My life had been safe. I didn't call it that at the time. I called it boring, predictable, suffocating. But now, I'd give anything to feel bored again. My father had wealth, land, a business. I was his heir. I hated him. I hated how he treated my mother. I hated how he made everything about control and coin. But I never once thought I wouldn't have a future. My own home. A name people respected. Now I was in a cage, sleeping in straw, breathing beside strangers who had already given up. Is this it? Is this who I am now? Am I going to spend the rest of my life working for someone else? Being ordered, beaten, bought? There's no negotiating my way out of this. No letters to home. No rescue. The world is bigger than I thought and crueler. And I am small. I turn over and see Nicholas, his head resting against the wood, eyes closed, lips silently moving through some verse in Greek. He looks calm, steady, like he's been here before. Maybe he has. Not in this place, but somewhere like it. Maybe that's why he carries that book like armor. I don't have armor. I have anger, regret. And for the first time in my life, I have fear that feels permanent. The sounds of the festival start rising in the distance. Drums, laughter, voices that don't care what's happening in the cage beside their fire. They're celebrating. And I am being erased. Patrick sat hunched in the corner of the cage, picking at a knot in the straw floor. The noise from the festival had faded into dull thumps and flickering torchlight. Most of the others were asleep, or at least pretending to be. Nicholas sat beside him, legs crossed, the Greek Bible resting lightly in his lap. His fingers traced the edge of the cover, not to fidget, but like he was checking to make sure it was still real. Patrick broke the silence. You read that book every night. Nicholas didn't look up. I try to. Why? Now he looked over. Not annoyed. Just curious. Patrick shifted. My father. He's into it. The Christian thing. Says it's the future. Hires people to preach at dinner parties. I never paid much attention. Didn't think I'd need to. Nicholas nodded, thoughtful. You know some stories then? Cain and Abel. The flood. Some bits about a carpenter who makes people better. Nicholas smiled softly. That's a start. Patrick leaned back against the wooden wall. Why does it matter so much to you? Nicholas took a breath, then turned the question around. Why are you so afraid? Patrick didn't answer right away. Then quietly. Because I had a life. I thought I did. A future. And now I'm in a cage. And I don't know what's going to happen. And you just sit there like none of it touches you. Nicholas looked up at the stars through the slats of the roof. It touches me. But not everything that touches us has to shape us. Patrick frowned. Nicholas continued. When I was younger, a man from Antioch taught me origami. He said folding paper was like folding thoughts. It helped keep his mind clean, focused. Patrick waited. So when I have nothing else to do, I do 3 things, Nicholas said calmly. I meditate. I clear my brain. And I read scripture. Because those things belong to me. He turned to Patrick, gentle but clear. I know my hands are valuable. My mouth, my eyes. That matters to people with power. If they think I can be useful, they won't throw me away. And today, he added, I have no control. So I don't pretend I do. Patrick stared at him, the weight of it settling slowly. That's how you're not losing your mind, he murmured. Nicholas offered a small nod. That and faith. He returned to his book, quietly reading. And for the first time since their capture, Patrick didn't feel quite as alone. Chapter 7. The watchers by the 5th morning. The cage didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a market stall. The guards hadn't said anything. No commands, no instructions. But we could feel it. Something was changing. The way they looked at us. The way they cleaned the space outside the pen. The way food was delivered with more attention, more consistency. That morning, the crowd came. They didn't shout or taunt. They stood in small groups, murmuring, watching, evaluating. 5 in particular stood apart, cloaked, confident, surrounded by their own men, the chieftains. They circled the pen like hawks over game. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with thick dark hair and steady eyes, lingered longer than the others. He didn't speak at first. He just watched Nicholas, studied him. Nicholas noticed. "That one," he whispered to me. "He's asked the most questions about me." "Who is he?" "I don't know yet," Nicholas said. "But I think he's the one who'll claim me." Patrick frowned. "How do you know?" Nicholas gave a slight smile. "Because I can write. And that man wants something recorded." The man stepped forward now, speaking quietly with one of the guards, then motioned toward Nicholas. "What's he saying?" Patrick asked. "I can't make out the words," Nicholas said, "but I can hear the tone. He's confident, measured, curious, not cruel." A few moments later, the man spoke a name, clear, firm. Jethro. He pressed a small stone into the guard's palm and walked away. Nicholas exhaled slowly. "His name is Jethro. And if I'm right, he's already decided." Patrick glanced toward him. "What about me?" Nicholas looked over, thoughtful. "That depends. On what you show them. On what you carry." Patrick scoffed. "I carry sarcasm and regret." "Then carry it well," Nicholas said with a half-smile. "Someone may be looking for exactly that." There was no horn, no speech, no grand announcement. One of the guards barked something, and just like that, the watching turned into choosing. The 5 chieftains stepped forward. Jethro didn't hesitate. He pointed straight at Nicholas. A sharp nod. No discussion. The gate was opened, and 2 men stepped in to pull Nicholas out. Not harshly, but with the certainty of ownership. Nicholas didn't resist. He stood, dusted his robe, tucked the Greek Bible under one arm, and walked out like it was the most normal thing in the world. The other chieftains moved quickly after that, scanning the group for strength, youth, obedience. They picked with their eyes, not their hearts. Big arms, broad backs. No one asked names. Patrick stayed near the back, heart thudding. Then Jethro pointed again, straight at him. The guard glanced over his shoulder to confirm. Jethro nodded once more. Patrick blinked. "Me." Nicholas, already standing beside Jethro, turned slightly and gave him the smallest, knowing smile. Patrick was pulled forward. As he stepped out of the cage, his legs stiff from 5 days of straw and cold, he heard one of Jethro's men mutter something. Nicholas translated under his breath. "He says you've got the frame for the hills, and a quiet fire in you." "Sheep," Patrick said flatly. "They think I'll be good with sheep." Nicholas replied, almost amused. "You could do worse." And with that, the gate shut behind them. They weren't free. But they weren't in the cage anymore. They were claimed. And the next chapter of their lives had begun, Chapter 8. The valley below, after 4 nights sleeping next to the road, no tent, no fire, just cold ground and a rough wool blanket between them and the stars, they finally crested the ridge. The trail had narrowed to little more than a worn groove in the earth, with sharp rocks jutting out on both sides. Their feet were blistered. Their backs ached. Patrick hadn't spoken in over an hour. Then they reached the top and stopped. The valley opened before them like something out of a dream neither of them knew they had. Nestled at the base of the hills, tucked into a cradle of green, was the village. Dozens of huts with smoke rising gently from stone chimneys. Wooden fences stitched the land like a patchwork quilt, some holding sheep, others vegetables, others wildflowers growing in careful rows. A narrow stream cut through the center, glittering in the sunlight like a ribbon of silver. Children ran barefoot along the paths. Dogs barked, but not in alarm. Women worked beside small fires, stirring pots and laughing like the world hadn't just stolen men from cages. Patrick exhaled, chest rising for the first time in days. Nicholas stood beside him, calm as always, but even he seemed moved. "It's beautiful," Patrick whispered. "It is," Nicholas said. And for a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, it didn't feel like the end of their lives. It felt like the beginning of something. Chapter 9. The first 20 days the valley was beautiful, but it didn't welcome them gently. Nicholas and Patrick were assigned to separate ado hares, old, wiry shepherds who spoke little and expected much. From the first light of morning to the fading edge of dusk, they worked the hills, mending fences, hauling water, learning the moods of the sheep and the warnings of the wind. There was no kindness, but no cruelty either. Just discipline, routine, a life older than either of them could grasp. At night, they were locked into a wooden shack near the edge of the pasture, just the two of them. No windows, no fire, just the dark and the silence. They weren't beaten. They weren't mocked. But they were watched. Nicholas kept the Bible hidden. He couldn't risk losing it. And the light was never enough to read. So instead they talked. Every night, after the doors slammed shut and the latch dropped, Nicholas would say, "Let's go back to the beginning." And they would. Genesis, creation, the garden, Cain and Abel. Not in full, just pieces Nicholas remembered well enough to speak aloud. Patrick would question everything. Nicholas would try to answer, or just let the silence carry it. In the early mornings, when they were lucky or left behind, they would open the book, tracing the words by dim morning light. Nicholas would read slowly, carefully, letting the words breathe. It wasn't worship, not yet. It was survival. And slowly, it became something more. Chapter 10. David and the Shadow. Everyone in the village knew David. They knew his laugh before they saw his face. They knew his voice across a crowded fire circle. They knew that if something clever was said, something daring was done, or someone needed help carrying a stubborn sheep out a river, David was nearby. He was Jethro's son, but he never used the title like a weapon. He wore it lightly. He made fun of himself before anyone else could. He danced with the children, debated with the elders, and never missed a chance to interrupt a serious conversation with something ridiculous. But when he stopped laughing, everyone listened. And wherever David went, he followed. The man had no name people spoke aloud, not anymore. Some said he lost his tongue in a raid. Others said he was born without one. But everyone knew what he was, a shadow in human shape. Tall, quiet, deadly when needed. He stood behind David like a second thought, always there, never speaking, eyes always scanning. Most just called him the Still One. David called him brother. That morning, David had been pestering his father over breakfast. "So what's this I hear about your two new captures?" "The ones who talk in scrolls." Jethro raised an eyebrow. "They work. That's what matters." "Oh, come on, father," David said, kicking back in his chair. "You don't pick up a scribe and a half-prince without a reason. You're building something, aren't you?" "They are disciplined." "You like them," David teased, pointing a bit of roasted meat like a blade. "You see something. Admit it." Jethro didn't answer, which meant David was right. That night, David didn't sleep. Instead, he and the Still One slipped away from the village circle and took the long path toward the shack where Nicholas and Patrick were locked in. Not to intimidate, just to listen. And what he heard through the slats of the wall, soft voices, debating scripture in a foreign tongue, pausing only to wonder and question and laugh, stopped David in his tracks. He looked at the Still One and whispered, "Well now, these two might be more than inventory." The Still One said nothing. He never did. But he didn't leave. And neither did David. Nicholas was mid-sentence, speaking softly in Greek as he tried to recall the phrasing of Abraham's call. Patrick was half listening, head tilted against the wall, trying to decide if the God in these stories sounded more like a father or a fire. Then crack. A twig snapped just beyond the wall. Both boys froze. Nicholas set the Bible down carefully, motioning with a single finger to stay silent. Patrick mouthed, "Did they hear us?" Outside, silence. Then the sound of a sudden shuffle, one body bumping into another. Then a sharp whisper, "You stepped on it." A low grunt in reply. "Don't give me that look, you definitely shit." Shuffle shove. More silence. Then fast retreating footsteps and the sound of muffled laughter disappearing into the dark. Inside, Patrick whispered, "What was that?" Nicholas smirked. "I think we have an audience." The next morning David didn't announce himself. He waited until the ado hares were away and the fields were quiet. He strolled down to the shack, arms crossed behind his back like he was casually inspecting a fence post, not two former captives. The Still One followed a few steps behind, hands tucked into his belt, expression blank as ever. David knocked twice, rhythmically, like a joke. then pushed the door open. Nicholas looked up from where he sat, brushing crumbs off his tunic. Patrick stood beside the cot, arms crossed, clearly annoyed to have company. David grinned. "You two tell a good story." Nicholas said nothing. David took 2 steps in, looking around with exaggerated curiosity. "Very cozy in here. Straw chic. Excellent acoustics." Then he spotted the book. It sat on the edge of the bed, just barely visible beneath a folded cloth. David walked over. Didn't touch it. Just looked. "Greek?" he asked. Nicholas nodded. David glanced back at him, something playful but sharp in his gaze. "You know most people here can't read, right? You're walking around with treasure." Nicholas gave a small nod. "It's not for them." David paused, then smiled again. "Good answer." He turned, gave the still one a nudge on the shoulder. "Let's go before I start liking them too much." They left without another word. But as the door shut, Nicholas and Patrick exchanged a glance. They weren't just being watched anymore. They were being noticed. Chapter 11. The summons the next morning, the air felt different. Colder. Still. The birds weren't singing like they had before. Even the sheep seemed quieter on the hillside. Nicholas and Patrick were eating from a shared bowl when Jethro appeared at the door. No knock. Just presence. He stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning the space, not unkind, but thorough. He didn't speak until he saw the book. It was sitting where it always did, carefully wrapped, partially hidden beneath Nicholas's cloak. But not hidden well enough. He walked over, lifted the edge of the cloth, and looked down at the faded cover. "Is this it?" he asked quietly. Nicholas didn't lie. Yes. Jethro didn't lift the book. He didn't open it. He just stared at it for a long time. Then nodded once. "The high priestess has requested it." Nicholas lowered his head. "Then it's hers." Jethro didn't answer. He turned and left, the book tucked carefully under one arm. They didn't come for them until just before midday. 2 guards, silent, respectful, opened the door and motioned for Nicholas and Patrick to follow. No explanation. No ropes. Just a gesture. They walked in silence, through narrow paths and across a footbridge that stretched over the silver stream, up a small rise, past the grazing fields, into the center of the village. There, set apart from the rest, stood the great hall. It wasn't large in a grand sense, but it felt heavy, ancient. The wood was dark with age and carved with symbols neither of them recognized. Animal horns framed the door. Smoke rose from a central chimney. It smelled of herbs and fire. As they stepped inside, their eyes adjusted to the dimness. The room was circular, with a central hearth burning low and slow. Cushions and stools lined the outer ring. At the far end, raised by just a few steps, stood a long seat, not a throne, but a seat of authority, draped in dark blue. And sitting there, the high priestess. Her eyes were on them before the door even closed. And beside her, just off her left shoulder, the Greek Bible rested on a cloth-covered stand. Chapter 12. The test, the high priestess said nothing at first. She simply watched. Her gaze moved from Patrick to Nicholas, then settled on the book beside her. At her side, a younger woman stepped forward and unwrapped the cloth. The Greek Bible sat open now, its pages curled slightly from years of use and weather. "I've heard stories," the high priestess said at last. Her voice was smooth, neither soft nor harsh, just steady. "A slave with a tongue like silver. A book that no one else can read." She looked to Nicholas. "Can you read this?" Nicholas nodded once. "Yes." She gestured toward the book. "Then read." Nicholas stepped forward. No grand display, just calm focus. He touched the page lightly, then began. A passage from Genesis. His voice low, even unmistakably fluent. The room stayed silent until he finished. Then her eyes shifted to Patrick. "And you?" Patrick stepped forward, heart hammering. "I don't read Greek. Only English." The high priestess nodded slowly. "And write." "Only English," he repeated. There was no scorn in her expression, just certainty. She leaned back slightly and said, "Then the roles are clear." She turned to one of the guards. "Take the younger one. He'll be sent with the flocks." He is to return to this village only once every 10 moons. Patrick opened his mouth to speak, but didn't. She turned to Nicholas. You'll stay. Here. The book stays, and so do you. Then her voice softened, just barely. Every 10 moons, when your friend returns. You may read together. Nicholas bowed his head. Thank you. And just like that, one went to the hills. One stayed in the shadows of the hall. And the Bible became their meeting point every 10 days, beneath stars and firelight. Chapter 13. The field the walk to the hills felt longer than it was. Patrick said nothing. Neither did the man leading him. He carried only a small bundle, bread, a waterskin, and a wool blanket. The rest he'd have to earn. When they reached the pasture, the man pointed to a crooked wooden shed and a rolling stretch of open hills beyond it. Then he turned and left. That first night was the lowest he'd ever felt. No fire, no conversation, no Nicholas. Just wind and dirt and the sharp sting of his own thoughts. This is who you are now, he told himself. Not a merchant's heir. Not anyone worth listening to. Just a body moving sheep through mud. He hated it. Hated the silence. Hated the weight of his own name. Hated how easy it had been to lose everything. But the sheep didn't care. They didn't ask questions or offer pity. They just moved, ate, stared, existed, and slowly they began to feel like company. One in particular stood out, jet black, heavy-set, and utterly uninterested in direction. He bumped into things. Knocked over the water trough. Once headbutt the shed door, completely off its hinges. Patrick named him Butch. Then there was Snowy, a wild-eyed female with a streak of rebellion in her bones. She ran for no reason, kicked when she was happy, and seemed to enjoy scaring the others. And then Oliver, smaller than the rest. White with soft gray spots, always at the back, eyes wide, as if the world might crush him any second. Patrick started talking to them, not out loud at first, but in his mind. Then, eventually, with whispered words. And over time, something strange began to happen. He didn't feel like a prisoner anymore. Not in the hills. Not with them. Chapter 14. The first returned Patrick arrived just before sunset. The gate guard recognized him, without a word, and pointed him toward the shack. When he opened the door, Nicholas was already waiting, cross-legged, book in hand, small lamp flickering in the corner. They didn't speak right away. Just hugged. Tight. The kind of hug that only happens when both people have seen too much in too little time. Patrick sat on the bed and said, I've never missed someone so much. Nicholas smiled softly. I missed you too. Patrick meant to talk more, to share stories, to say something meaningful. But the second his head hit the straw pillow, he was gone. The next morning, Nicholas had already prepared a place to write, smooth bark strips, a sharpened reed, and a pot of thick black ink. Patrick rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Are we writing already? Nicholas looked up. Today we begin. He turned to the Greek Bible, carefully unfolding the cloth. We start with Adam and Eve, he said. But this isn't just reading. This is transcribing. Your job is to learn to translate what I read into English, line by line, word by word. Patrick nodded slowly, letting it sink in. Nicholas continued. And my job is to create a version in the Celtic tongue, so that one day they'll understand these stories too. Patrick looked at the book, then at the ink, then at Nicholas. You really think this story is worth all that effort? Nicholas didn't hesitate. I think it's the only thing I've ever read that understands what it means to be human. Patrick picked up the reed. Then let's start writing. Chapter 15. The shepherd's story. The wind rolled gently over the hills, carrying the scent of fresh grass and wild herbs. The sheep grazed in quiet clumps, spread out like white clouds across green earth. Patrick walked among them, staff in hand, speaking softly, not to himself, but to his flock. I still don't know why they had to eat the fruit, he said, shaking his head. I mean, it's not like they didn't have everything else. Snowy kicked a clump of dirt at a butterfly. Patrick nodded. Exactly. That's what I said. He turned to Butch, who was lying flat in the sun, chewing without a care. Would you have eaten it? Butch blinked slowly. No opinion. Patrick chuckled. Yeah, you would have eaten the tree. He paced a bit further, picking up a stick, dragging it along the dirt as he walked. Nick said they hid after. That's the part that gets me. That they felt shame. Like they wanted to disappear. He glanced back at Oliver, trailing at the edge of the herd. You know something about hiding, huh? Oliver flinched at a buzzing bee and buried his face in the tall grass. Patrick smiled faintly, then looked up toward the hills, where the path home waited for him in a few more days. I think I get it now, he said. It wasn't about the fruit. It was about the fear. The feeling of being exposed, of being known and maybe still not loved. He sat down on a rock, letting the sun warm his shoulders. And maybe that's why this story matters, he added quietly. Because it's still happening. Chapter 16. In the beginning, it was just after sunrise. The shack was still, the fire out. The fields hadn't called for Patrick yet. Their world, just for a few hours, belonged to the two of them and the open book. Patrick sat across from Nicholas, reed pen in hand, a fresh sheet of bark laid before him. So, this is how it starts, he asked, eyes on the first few lines of Greek. Nicholas nodded. This is the beginning. Patrick leaned back, slightly. The writer. He must have believed this really happened, right? Like, these weren't just symbols. This was the creation of humans. Nicholas was quiet a moment. Then, or it's both. Truth doesn't always have to be literal to be real. Patrick nodded slowly. So, God makes a man, then a woman, then gives them everything, but tells them not to touch one tree. And they do, Nicholas added gently. Patrick frowned. Why? Nicholas didn't answer right away. Because they were curious. Because they were human. Maybe because they didn't believe the consequences were real. Patrick glanced at the page. But then they feel shame. Nicholas met his eyes. That's the part that hits me. Patrick exhaled. Yeah, same. He leaned forward. They cover themselves. They hide from God. They hide from each other. And suddenly, they're not walking side by side anymore. They're blaming each other. Nicholas added. And then they're sent away. Together, but no longer innocent. Patrick shook his head. That feels like every relationship that ever went wrong. They sat in silence for a moment, the story hanging in the air. Patrick finally asked, So what do we write? Nicholas smiled faintly. We write what happened. But we also write what it meant. He looked down at the page. Shame, he said. Fear. Blame. And still, somehow, love. Patrick dipped the reed into the ink. And together, they began to write. The page was mostly filled now. Their first shared chapter in a new language. Not perfect. Not polished. But real. Patrick leaned back, rubbing the ink from his fingertips. That was heavier than I thought it'd be. Nicholas nodded. That's how it starts. Not with miracles. With choices. They sat for a moment, letting the silence settle. The fire had faded to warm coals. The sun was climbing. Patrick would have to leave soon. Then Nicholas looked over. You ever felt that? Shame like that? Patrick didn't answer at first. Then quietly, yeah. Every day, since we got here. Not just for what's happened. For what I used to take for granted. For how I treated my mother. For not standing up to my father. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't a bad person. But I wasn't awake. Nicholas nodded slowly. I used to be proud of how much I could learn. How much I knew. Then I ended up in chains and realized I still didn't know how to listen. They both smiled, tired, honest smiles. Patrick stood and pulled his cloak around him. I'll see you in 10, he said. Nicholas gave a short nod. 10 moons. And just before Patrick stepped out the door, he paused. That part of the story, after the shame, after the exile, they still had each other. That matters. Nicholas nodded again. That's what we hold on to. And then the door closed, and the next stretch of hills and sheep awaited.